Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Fantasia, brought to us by Sega and Infogrames. Fantasia is loosely based on the Disney classic, with featured animation mixed up with classical music. Probably the most famous piece from the whole series is The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which featured Mickey Mouse. And that's who you'll be taking the role of while playing through this game. You go through several levels based on the different classical pieces and sets from the Fantasia movie, all while collecting musical notes and points in order to move on to the next level. The game is rather bland in its delivery, and overall I get some pretty low scores, with the very beginning of the game actually probably being one of the better moments with the opening animation of Mickey falling asleep. So here we go with Fantasia for the Sega Genesis. When you start the game, you actually have a couple different difficulties, as well as you can select how many dreams and continues you have. The dreams act as your lives in the game, and of course continues, when you run out of lives, you'll use a continue. At the start of the level, you actually get to see the orchestra in the background as Mickey walks past, and we start off in the first level. Now the first level of course is based on the Sorcerer's Apprentice here, as we have all the walking broomsticks that we have to deal with. These broomsticks and mops will be moving back and forth, and you'll have to jump on their heads in order to defeat them, or fire Mickey's magic ability in order to take them out. Start off by going into the lower left corner and get one of the brooms to follow you. When it gets all the way over to the left, if you do a short jump, sometimes actually running into them, you'll get a whole bunch of extra items to appear. Our goal on the stage is to collect points, but also to find the hidden musical notes in order to actually advance to the next level of the game. So anytime you see any of the giant magical books flying around, be sure to take them out because they grant you a decent amount of points, and they'll help you out. The first level of the game, though, doesn't combine just the Sorcerer's Apprentice, but you also have the Dance of the Reed Flutes and the Arabian Dance. In this segment it gets a little bit tougher as you have some of the same enemies, but some new enemies are also introduced, including the giant pelican enemies that you can jump on for some nice 800 points each. Climbing up on various moving platforms, sometimes even if it doesn't seem necessary, will actually come to your benefit because you'll be able to get certain point scores in order to actually appear, especially hidden items, and that way you can grab those hidden items for usually a big boost to your score. Taking out these hopping frog enemies are pretty easy, and they each net you 400 points. Here we'll have to bounce along the gators in order to get over to the far right side. Now in this area you can actually fall in the water and you'll be okay, but if you stand in the water for more than just a few seconds you end up losing some health, so you want to get out of the water quickly, but it's not an instant death. Over here you can drop down into this whirlpool and you'll actually be teleported to a little hidden area where you'll have to swim through some fish. Down here though, there's some of the big pearls that you can grab in order to replenish your magic, as well as give you a bunch of points. Underwater you can't jump on enemies, so you'll have to use your magic to your benefit in order to take out any enemy that may be directly in your path that you can't swim around. This area isn't too long though before you'll be able to exit and get back on the land. The hit detection overall in this game can be a little bit iffy, and that's just one of the many reasons why the game is considered rather mediocre at times. Sometimes you'll get a big item boost that'll actually appear and then start going the opposite direction from you on screen, so you'll have to chase it down like we did earlier with one of those star items. Be sure to run at it quickly so you can grab it in order to get a nice little boost of points. Over here, take out the last few pelicans as we'll grab the star on the far right side and then enter inside the castle, which takes us to another part inside of the Sorcerer's Apprentice here. Unfortunately, I am not positive on the exact amount of score you need in each of the levels in order to do the advancement, but you'll easily be able to tell if you have enough when you actually make it to the end, because unfortunately if you don't have enough, it'll send you back to the beginning of the level and you'll have to go through it all the way again. So just do your best to collect as many points as possible. Drop down here and go through this door in order to get to a hidden area. Inside here, watch out for the enemies and collect all the stars and take out the giant books for a bunch of points. Once you grab the last item, we can exit out of that area and continue on the level. I find it best for the most part during this segment to stay along the top path, as it seems to be the easiest to avoid taking unnecessary damage. When we reach to the end of this area though, we see our total score, and then we actually get to see the bar up here with all the music notes that we've now collected. It'll play a little bit of a song that we've gotten so far, and then we'll move on to the next level. The second level of the game, which is also based on an element, this time being Earth as the first one was based on water, is the Rite of Spring. Thankfully, we were able to find enough of the hidden musical notes or points in the last level in order to continue on to this one, and as you can see, it's a jungle-themed level with lots of dinosaurs flying all around. You can use these dinosaurs to your advantage in order to get magical books that are flying overhead, as well as some other items, but be careful because some of them do fly rather quickly. One key thing that I hadn't mentioned yet is actually the way to attack enemies, and no, it's not just simply jumping on them. You actually have to jump on them and hold the down button. If you don't hold down while jumping on an enemy, you just go right through them and they end up hurting you. In this secret area, be sure to jump on the platform here because one of the hidden magical musical notes will actually end up falling down here and we can collect it. Keep making your way through the cave area, watching out for the dragonfly enemies that are going to fly over your head. They're rather small, so sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to directly jump on. Also, of course, be careful of all the rolling rocks that are going to be moving around. Here we can actually use one of the dragonflies by doing a big jump over, land on it, and bounce off of it in order to get to the far right platform. Grab the fairy or sprite at the end of the area in order to be teleported back outside. Once back out here, you'll have the killer plants that are going to be moving back and forth, so be careful of them. You'll eventually come across one of those hidden magical doors again, and just like before, going inside of it, you'll be able to net yourself some extra items. But be careful, because if you end up getting hit by the falling rock that rolls down, you won't be able to actually gather any of the items, and you'll instantly be teleported out without collecting anything. After we grab all the items though, it's time to continue on. Jump along these top platforms, avoiding the dinosaur, and grab the book hidden up top. Continue along and then jump on the dinosaurs' heads that are in the water so you can actually get to these top platforms to grab yourself a hidden star amongst all these falling platforms. Over to the right, you'll once again run into a sprite or fairy, and you can get teleported to another hidden area. This desert-filled area, use the book in order to jump up here in order to collect a few extra items, including a music note. Do your best to avoid all the dragonflies and jump on their heads if you can, in order to keep bouncing along the top and not having to fall down to the ground area. When you make it to the end though, be sure to jump down and end up jumping on this last egg. Do so, you'll be able to collect a few extra items, including a few extra eggs, an orb, as well as a music note. You then have only a little bit left of the level as you'll jump into the ferry at the end and complete the stage. We now move on to level number 3. Stage number 3 is based on the element of air, and this time we have to do the Russian dance as well as the pastoral symphony and the dance of the hours. Basically in this level we're going to be working our way upwards, collecting items along the way and jumping on many different clouds in order to boost ourselves up. There's a decent amount of new enemies throughout this whole area, as well as some new gameplay elements, including the bubbles. You'll have to ride in these bubbles in order to get up to higher platforms, and if they hit a platform that you don't want to land on, they end up popping, and you may have to drop down a few platforms to get back inside the bubble. Stop over here to the far right side in order to find one of those hidden doors so we can collect some extra items. Be careful of the projectiles that get spewed out from the little panpipers on the left and right side. Some of them will like to dance across the middle of the screen, and those are pretty easy to avoid. Here we'll have to deal with some enemies, as well as collect some more extra items for ourselves. You can bounce on these enemies' heads in order to gather some extra points if you want to as well, as it can actually be a little bit tricky to work your way down because there's so many of them coming up. Just be sure when you're falling down that you land on the right platforms that you want to, so you can collect all the important items. There's a few of the musical notes hidden throughout this area, so be sure to grab them while making your way through. Grab the last musical note, and then be sure to hit the ferry on the right side in order to continue on the level. Once out back in the main area, continue our trek upwards. The only thing that's really challenging though about this whole level is the fact that if you fall down off one of the platforms, you'll have to re-travel all the way up the platforms that you ended up falling past. Other than that, it's a pretty straightforward and simple level to explore through. They like to put a lot of the items just out of reach on the far opposite side of whatever platform you're on, so if you're on the left, they're going to be on the right, but they always like to put an enemy or a bubble right near you, so you can travel along by either jumping on it or jumping in it in order to get across that gap. use this bubble here and we're actually going to travel up a pretty good distance as we're making our way up. When you make it up to the top here, be sure to grab the music note on the far right side and collect the magic book before jumping onto the fairy on the far left side and completing the stage. The final level of the game is based on the fire element, and with that we have segments based on the Night on Bald Mountain, as well as Toccata and Fugue in D minor. Also the most interesting level overall to look at, as you have a very demonic presence here with all the fire as well as the demon-like enemies that you'll be facing off with during this stage. While a couple enemies do make a reappearance, for the most part you'll be battling these new enemies. The new enemies do take several jumps on their head in order to defeat them, but they end up netting you a decent amount of points. The hardest part about the segment is not falling down into the lava below and continue to bounce on the enemies' heads as long as you need to in order to actually defeat them. A little ways in, you can jump into one of the fairies or sprites in order to get teleported to a secret area. Just like all the other ones before, be careful of taking out the enemies, and then we can move on all these bouncing moving platforms and collect some extra items. Over here on the far left side, you can jump on these platforms in order to boost yourself upwards so you can collect all the items up in the top here. Then drop down to below in order to get to the left side and collect some more, and then finally collect the music note on the upper left side here. Before we reach to the end though, you will find another musical note, so be sure to grab that in a pretty easy spot, and take out more enemies if you want to. As we make it farther into the stage, be careful of the enemies on these platforms above here, as you'll have to take them out before you attempt in order to get up, and once you're up there, then you can bounce along their heads in order to get over the giant gap below. Time your jumping correctly so you can grab the star up in the air here, and then when you land on the small platforms below connected to this one, be sure you jump off quickly because they will disappear after you land on them. Here you'll have a large amount of the witch enemies. Be careful in jumping on them, as you can alternate your jumps in order to take them all out. Just be sure to jump at the proper moment so you'll be able to make it as far across this gap as you can. Thankfully, it's not an instant death when you do fall into the pits though, you just take a little bit of damage. After dealing with these final few enemies here, jump into the sprite or fairy on the top right corner in order to move on to the next screen of the game. Once over here, use the enemy in order to bounce up so you can actually bounce on the witch right next to it, and then get over the little area. Here you'll have some demon cats inside of cages, be careful of them as you continue making your way over to the right. Overall, even though the enemies can be rather tough, them taking several hits to actually kill, as well as there being a decent amount of them on screen at once, the final level of the game really isn't too difficult. The worst thing is really just clutter on the screen. One of the coolest enemies though easily is all the eyes in the backgrounds and the shadows, as you actually can bounce on these giant eyes and use them in order to get across areas as well as take them out. Be sure to drop down here and take out the ghost in order to grab the musical note. Then continue along all the eyes in the background in order to continue along your path. Here we can bounce along some cages and then some more eyes in the background in order to get over another large gap. When you make it over here, this is the very end of the game as you have a couple more enemies to take out before jumping into the fairy in the upper right corner. If you actually stand here and take out all the enemies as you'll have to, there's a decent amount of them, so this kind of works as a little bit of a boss battle that you'll have to contend with, because you do have to defeat them all before you're actually able to access the fairy. Thankfully, we have a decent amount of magic saved up, and a lot of them can just be jumped on like most of the enemies that we've been doing throughout the whole game. Once they're all taken care of, jump into the fairy and you've completed Fantasia. You can sit back and enjoy the ending. And that's it. That 1 or 2 second ending is all you get before it goes right back to the Sega screen and starts the game all over again. And with that, it's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.